Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, detailed build guide for the $1,000 Ryzen 5 2600 system. I've previously covered all these parts and why they're in here, so I'm not going to repeat myself in that regard. Link in the video description below to part 1 of this video series where I do a parts explainer and a parts overview. Instead, this is designed to be a step-by-step guide to help you build your first computer. Whether it's your first or 10th, you may very well find this entertaining, interesting, informative, or perhaps amusing. In just a minute, the camera is going to be overhead, and we're going to take all these parts step by step in over half an hour, assembling this computer so that you can follow along either for fun or when you build your own machine. A couple of quick things before we get to the build guide itself. Number 1, this video was sponsored by Gigabyte. They provided most of the products shown in this video, and I appreciate their support for making this happen. Second of all of the products you see here, as well as some alternative suggestions above and below these, will be linked down in the video description below to Amazon and Newegg. Those are affiliate links. Using those supports the channel when you shop at no extra cost to you. And if you like these videos and want to see more of them, please use those when shopping. Finally, there were 2 modifications that I made to part 1 of this build series. Number 1, I deleted the Coolermaster cooler and we went ahead and used the Wraith stealth cooler that comes with the Ryzen 5 2600. I wanted to show you how it went together without that cooler, and I'll do some benchmarking testing on it. I'll show that to you in a future video, and then I'll replace that cooler with the Coolermaster dual fan RGB and show you the difference. The other thing we added, and I just got this from Coolermaster, is a 24-pin ATX 90-degree connector. This actually lets you connect the power cable at a 90 degree to the motherboard rather than straight in, cleaning up the build process. You'll see that in just a minute when we actually put it together. Otherwise, everything that you see here is as I showed you in part 1 of this video. For now, that's entirely enough talking. Let's get the camera overhead and start putting this together. At the end of the build process, I'll give you my final thoughts and conclusions and what I might change if I were doing this again. Before we jump into the build itself, I'm going to do a quick parts overview with the parts sitting here, simply because, well, not everybody's going to have watched the first video and I want to explain what's included. There's no why here, but I'm just going to go over the parts really quickly. This is the $1,000 Ryzen 5 2600 based computer build. This thing is an awesome value for the money. 6 cores, 12 threads, up to 3.9 gigahertz clock speed out of the box. Overclockable, great CPU, a very nice full-featured Aorus B350 Pro Wi-Fi board, great audio, great Wi-Fi, great, frankly, everything. An RX 588 gigabyte card, also Aorus branded, for 1080p and 1440p gaming, high to ultra detail. That is the current deal in graphics cards at the moment. 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM, fully RGB of course, and featuring 2 extra RGB modules to populate all 4 memory slots with RGB. A Gigabyte UD Pro Series 2 512 gigabyte solid state drive. I've previously reviewed it. Very quick, very good drive. And then a 750 watt 80 plus gold power supply. Very good value for the money and plenty of power if you want to add a second RX 580 in the future and crossfire them, or upgrade to RX Vega 64 or whatever comes up. You'll have all the power you need for whatever you want to put in here. Not shown in this shot is the case, which I'll put on the desk in a minute. It is the Coolermaster H500 mid-tower case, and it's getting its own coverage, but I'll talk about it briefly as we build in it. But it's got great fans, great ventilation, beautiful RGB on the front, interchangeable front cases. You can have the front of the panel be clear acrylic, or you can have it be mesh for maximum airflow. So you have the option, nothing extra order because it comes with it, and a very handy carrying handle right on the top. So also very easy to move around for the low price of only $99, and considering it comes with 3 fans in the case and the interchangeable front panels and the handle, that's a deal. The first step in our build is to clear all this stuff off the desk. We're going to take the motherboard out of the box and we're going to prepare it by putting the CPU and the cooler on the motherboard. And then I'm going to put the case on here and we'll prepare it and put the motherboard in the case. First things first, we'll get the motherboard out of the box. I mentioned already that this is a nice fully featured board. It really is. Put the board aside and take the cardboard insert out. We have our external Wi-Fi antenna. It's not a little dongle, it's an actual proper antenna you can mount on top of the desk, behind the desk. It's got a long cord. So if you want excellent Wi-Fi reception, it's got you covered. We have 2 serial ATA data cables. We have our user manual and a driver CD and or coffee coaster, depending upon your preference. We have one of my favorite features of the Gigabyte boards. This is an adapter for the front panel connectors. When we hook everything up in the case, we have to put power switch, reset switch, hard drive activity light, etc., all on the motherboard. They're all these little teeny thin cables. They plug into this, and then you put this whole thing on the motherboard. It makes it so much easier. These contain the various M.2 screws for installing M.2 SSDs, either SATA or NVMe. And that's it for the box. Wait, one more item, a case sticker, an Aorus branded case sticker for the front of your case, if you like such things. While I take this out of the bag, I do have to give Steve over at Gamers Nexus, another YouTube channel and a website, a big, huge thank you for this mod mat. This is a mat designed, it's very, very high quality material. I've shown it in a previous unboxing. Protects the desk, it's anti-static. You can see his name right down there. So he sent this over for me, and I just want to say a big, huge thank you. They are not inexpensive, but if you do a lot of computer work, then this is much better than just having fabric or worse, a bare table to work on. Oh, look at all the shiny stuff. And we have plastic to peel off. Okay, I know some of you think the plastic thing is silly, but I get asked to peel off plastic more than you would imagine. I need to like mark and save all of the plastic peels and turn it into like an hour-long ASMR video of plastic peeling. This Aorus B350 Pro Wi-Fi board is not the least expensive B350 you can buy. You can absolutely buy less expensive boards. However, it has a number of features that the less expensive boards don't have. Dual M.2 slots, both of which have these heat shield protectors. And this is not plastic here. This right here, this is actually metal. So these provide real metal rather than just a piece of plastic that frankly would act as an insulator. Down along the bottom, you've got a ton of ports. You've got a couple of USB ports. You've got a USB 3 port right here for the front of your case. You've got your front panel audio connectors. And then the big connector here where that front panel adapter goes so that you can put all your cables and connectors in. We have a very high quality ALC 1220 audio solution with quality capacitors. Cheaper boards have cheap audio. Now, if you're not a gamer, if you're just putting together a basic system, well, then none of this matters. But if you want a quality audio solution, this is a step above the cheaper ones. There's a bunch of RGB. You've got some RGB up here. You've got some RGB down here. You've got 4 RAM slots. You've got 6 SATA ports. You've got a bunch of fan headers, multiple 2 fan up headers up here. You've got 1 here in the middle. You've got several along the bottom down here. So you can connect a lot of case fans to this as well. The power delivery on this is also a bit better than some of the cheap boards. Now, it's not going to reach the $200 to $250 board level you'll get on the super premium, but it is an upgrade over the cheap stuff. And then one of my favorite features on this board is the fact that the I/O shield is integrated right into it. There's nothing to stick into the case. The protective cover is built in, so you just stick this right into your case, and you don't have to mess with trying to line all this up with the I/O shield. You just put it in, and there it goes. Speaking of which, you can see our USB 3.0 ports here, HDMI and DVI. If you use an APU, a Ryzen 5 2400G, for example, with the Ryzen 5 2600, these won't do anything. You've got your Wi-Fi antenna adapters here, USB 3.1 Gen 2 ports, 10 gigabit per second, the HD audio solution I mentioned before, gigabit Ethernet, and notice the little Gigabyte logo right here? Yeah, you want to bet that lights up? This is pretty cool. Premium board, premium features. One of the things that I love about AMD boards is how easy it is to install the CPU. Because the pins are on the CPU and not the socket, there's nothing here. You can touch this. You can't do this on an Intel. This is a 0 insertion for socket. You simply lift this arm up and out of the way, and the CPU drops right into place. Now, there are notches that are not the same around there, and so you do need to make sure to line the CPU up correctly. If you look at the bottom of the CPU, you'll see all of the pins, and you'll see one corner that has a square notch with a little triangle. and it lines up to the square notch right here on the board. The others are diagonals. And so it simply lines right up into place and simply sets right down. I didn't push it down, I simply let go and it simply slotted right into place and it's not going to move. We then bring the lever down and that simply holds the pins in place and now it doesn't budge at all. These two plastic clips are the clips that you would put an older style AM3 or AM2 cooler on here, but we are not going to use these. What you do is you take your screwdriver and you unscrew these 4 screws. They are screwed into a back plate on the board. We will keep the back plate. Our cooler has 4 screws on it right here. These 4 screws will screw into where these bits of plastic are. Some aftermarket coolers will actually clip onto these clips and you would actually retain this into place. So if you're not using the stock cooler, make sure that you read the directions before you take this apart because you may find that you actually keep these. This is so much easier to do outside of the case than it is on the inside of the case. But do be sure that the motherboard is placed on something secure where the back of it's not going to get damaged or scratched. Now, again, this is what this Gamers Nexus mod mat is wonderful for. This material is meant to have electronics placed against it. It's anti-static surface. So if you don't have one of these, you can do it on top of the motherboard box. Don't do it on top of the motherboard anti-static bag because that insulates it. Just put it on the box. And then we just take these 2 pieces of plastic off. This is the AMD Wraith Stealth cooler. The Stealth is what comes with the 2600. The Spire comes with the 2600X. It's thicker, it's got a copper core. Pre-applied thermal paste comes with the cooler. You don't need to put any paste on. You would normally just put it right on. I have actually already used this CPU somewhere else, and I've used this, which is why there's no thermal paste. Now, I have multiple tubes of thermal paste, but if you don't, you can buy a tube of very high quality MX4 for $6, $7, and it will give you multiple applications. If you are having to apply thermal paste, it's only about the size of a rice grain, and I generally put mine right in the center. There we go. Now, that might be 2 rice grains. 2 rice grains is okay, 1's okay, less is not, more is not. Now these screw holes here are actually the back plate, which is on the back of the board. That comes off. If I lift this up, it'll come out, but there's no need to because we're sticking this right on. As for whether you put it this way or this way, it doesn't really matter other than where this cable is. I'm going to put it this way because I want the cable up on the top to plug in. And so we line up the 4 holes right where they belong onto the screw holes. There we go. And then we're going to do a cross pattern. I'm going to screw the first one in just a bit, and then I'm going to come across diagonal and screw this one in just a bit. And then I will screw this one in, and then this one. Now, you never use power tools when doing a computer, when building a computer. This is just gentle pressure. There we go. This is a brand new screwdriver. I recently got this screwdriver, and the magnetic bit is really strong. It doesn't want to let go. My older screwdriver, which is a bit beat up and well loved, its magnetic bit isn't as good as it used to be because it's a number of years old now. When working on a computer, screwdrivers with magnetic bits are a godsend. These things are absolutely wonderful. I would never want to build a computer without one. I mean, you certainly can. Now these have springs on them, so I'm just tightening it until it's finger tight. You don't go crazy and overboard because those springs will let you know when it's down and secure. But you do want to make sure, see if I can get that in there without looking and putting my head in the way. And then we take our 4-pin fan connector and we locate the CPU fan. The bottom one is optional. The top gray one here is the one that it's expecting to see, and we plug that in. Now we may zip tie this off or otherwise secure this once it's in the case, but for now, the CPU is installed, the cooler's installed, the RAM will go in after we put this into the case. You don't want that sticking up trying to put it in the case. This is all we're going to do. I'm going to take this away, we'll put the case here and continue. With the motherboard safely set aside, we have our Coolermaster H500 case on the desk, and as I said, this thing is a beast. For $99, it may be the quote entry-level H500 series. It's not the H500P, it's not the H500M, But as I said, it's got two 200mm RGB fans. It's got a rear exhaust fan, a handle on the top, tempered glass side panel, dual front panels for changing out from mesh versus acrylic. I love this thing. It's very nice. Now I have my lovely wife, Rogue, here, and she is going to provide us a hand. Say hi, Rogue.
Hello.
And she is going to unscrew the glass on the case for us. You just take a flathead screwdriver and you unscrew these two screws. Now this is nicer than most where you just unscrew side case screws, because this only has screws on the top. There are none on the bottom, and that's because this whole thing is on a lip down here. It'll come off and slide out. If the case were standing up, so these come out and there's nothing to unscrew here because it actually tilts. And if the case were on its side, it's not just going to fall off. You would actually pull it off of the lip, which is really nice. Inside this case, we have some wonderful features. First of all, we have a drive cage down here to store our 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives. That is removable. There's a screw down there. We have a power supply shroud with a hole right here to run our cables through if need be, to cover that up and make it look really nice. We have a cable management shroud here, and this is very nice because it's thinner here and thicker here for the 24-pin ATX cable to hide all of those. We have very nice rubber grommets right here to run the cables through. And most importantly, an actual depth behind the motherboard tray. I can put my hand, not quite all of it because it's not quite that thick, but I can get my hand under here and there's plenty of room for cables. Many $50 cases do not have that much room behind the motherboard tray to put cables, and so that provides extra working room. This whole case has more Z depth than the typical $50 or even $70 case does. For $99, I really do think this is a deal. The first step when you open a case like this is you need to prepare where you're going to install the motherboard. Now there is one motherboard standoff right here, but there's none in the other slots. In most of these cases, usually in one of these drive trays, you'll find a box with the supplies. And at first, I was looking here going, interesting, there are no supplies. It turns out, and you can thank my wife Rogue for this, she said, aren't they behind that? They are. So you're going to need to undo the shroud and you'll find all the parts behind there. Honey, why don't you take the power shroud off? There you go. It just slides off just like that. And then underneath, we can find all of the parts. Num, 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 silica gel. Don't eat this. In this bag of parts, we have got all kinds of things. We have got zip ties. Save these, use these are wonderful. We have got an what is this, a microfiber cloth, an anti-static microfiber for cleaning the front, even branded with Coolermaster. How nice is that, honey? This is the RGB controller. This can be used. Here we have an RGB controller. This provides a simple way to provide RGB control to the front RGB fans. Now we have a nice RGB motherboard, so we're going to plug those directly into the motherboard. But if you didn't have an RGB motherboard, you could use this. This is simply an extra Molex power connector to provide additional fan headers in the event your motherboard doesn't have enough fan headers for the fact that this case comes with 3 fans. We don't need this because we have a premium motherboard. And then there's a plastic bag that has all of the screws and standoffs. So I'll open this up. We need to take out these, and we need to fill each of the slots that line up with our motherboard. I've grabbed the motherboard that we prepared earlier. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's a standard 9-hole configuration ATX board. Some boards have an extra port here. Some boards are shorter and don't use the screw heads over here. So it's important to take a look at your motherboard and take a look at the case and go, okay, where do I need to put the screw heads? Now it is possible to put these in by hand. I will say, however, they are often stubborn and don't want to go in. I long ago got a basic ratchet with a hex head that fits these because I find that makes it about 8 billion times easier to put these in rather than arguing. If you don't have such a tool, you can certainly use a pair of pliers to grip onto them. But this is so much easier and has made my life much easier. Now this is a ratchet head. So there we go. And we will just ratchet this into place. Not the sort of tool that everybody's going to have, but I do enough computer systems that this has made my life so much easier. Because trying to screw these in by hand, to be honest, sucks. You don't need to over tighten them. You don't need to push them in too hard. You don't need to strip them. And the ratchet is really handy when it comes to these difficult to reach ones. There we go. And I'm just doing it finger tight. I'm not over tightening it. You don't need to strip the screws. Now, just for giggles and grins, we're gonna have Rogue Storm. See this one right here?
Yes.
Try that. It's okay if you can't do it. I couldn't either. Just try screwing it in vertical. Make sure not to cross thread the screws.
How do you do that?
Just make it go straight down. Do the best you can, my love.
Do I do it?
It has to go all the way down. See how it's flush with the metal?
Well, that's as tight. I can't tighten it anymore.
As my wife just said, that's as tight as she can make it go with her fingers. These are really, really tough. Now, if you have needle nose pliers, you can actually go down vertical and clamp on the sides. This, go spend $10 at a hardware store and buy yourself a small socket. This makes your life 18 billion times easier. I would never build a computer without one again. Right tool for the job. There we go. All 9 in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So there were 2 already installed, these 2 right here. Right tool for the job. Now we want to put the motherboard in place. There is a fan cable right here, which we are just going to sort of tuck out of the way so that it's not in the way. The I/O shield goes straight through here, and as I mentioned, this motherboard comes with the I/O shield already installed, so there's nothing to put in the case. The motherboard does not go straight down. You'll end up scraping the bottom of it. So it goes in, slide at an angle, put the fixed I/O shield into the hole first, and then set it down into place. And then we're gonna use 9 screws to screw it in. I generally start with this one right here, just to get it held in place, and then I go around and add them all and tighten them at the end. So we'll put this down here. Very hard to do without my head being in the way. Well, that went in really easy. I'm very pleased with how nice that went in. If you are not sure what screws to use, take an extra motherboard post header and then just try screwing them by hand and see if they go all the way down. If they don't, it's not the right screw. With all 9 screws in place, by the way, with a deep case like this, having a long magnetic screwdriver to get to these hard to reach holes is really nice. We can move on. The next big thing we want to install is our power supply, because we don't want to put anything else in that's going to make it hard to insert the power supply. The nice thing about the modular cables is we can wait to install those until after this is in. Fan side down, because there is a grill on the bottom, and the 4 screws that the power supply came with will simply go into the back through here, and we simply drop it into place after we move those cables out of the way. I have now turned the case over to manage those cables to get the power supply installed. We're gonna take the back of the case off. We're gonna have to anyway for cable management. So my lovely wife, Rogue, is going to undo the 2 side screws and pull the back panel off. These, in theory, are thumb screws. It's just easier to use a screwdriver. And they just come off. And then the whole panel just slides right back and comes off. This particular case only has glass on the front side of the case. It doesn't have glass on the back, but personally, I prefer that because this way you can just have the cables in the back and not have to worry about it. Looking inside the back of the case, look at all the Z-depth we have between the lip of the case and the motherboard tray. I love this. This is wonderful. Notice here that we actually have 2 mounting points for 2.5-inch SSDs. Now we can certainly mount them into the 3.5-inch toolless drive trays. There's screw holes for it, but you also have the option of mounting them back here as well But we need to do that before we put the motherboard on, and since we've done that already, I'm just going to put the SSDs over there. Here you can see the back plate to the CPU. We didn't take that off because we just screwed it into those 4 holes. And then these are all of the cables which are blocking the power supply installation. We are just going to take these out for the moment to get them out of the way. Boy, that is a mess of cables. There is a zip tie right here. You're going to want to undo this, and this is going to need some additional cable management. There's a lot of connectors for the RGB front connect cables here, fan header connectors, and then the front panel connectors. We'll deal with that in a minute. I'm now going to have my lovely wife put the power supply here and screw it into the back of the case. It really is as simple as just placing it into place and lining it up. Stick the cables for the moment over the bottom of the case. Take the 4 screws that came with the power supply. We will just stick that over the back of the case. Well, that doesn't want to go over the back of the case. We'll make it go over the back of the case. We will give her a screwdriver. And then just hold the power supply in place and line up the 4 screws. With the power supply securely in place, we are now going to run the 24-pin ATX cable and the CPU connector through the bottom hole and back through the case. We're going to run it up through here and connect it to the motherboard. But we have something pretty cool up our sleeves. We have the Coolermaster 24-pin 90-degree adapter. This will install right here, and this will let us not have the power cable sticking right out into the case. So we're going to open this up. I've never used one of these before. They just sent me this. And all I can say is, where has this been all my life? Why have we not had these? If I can get out of the plastic container. There we go. Why have we not had these all my life? So it looks like it goes clip. Okay, so this installs just like this, and then we will plug it. We'll plug the power cable into the adapter. We now have the 24-pin ATX cable run through here, and we have the 8-pin CPU connector power cable here. You don't want to leave this like this. Even though there's plenty of room, this gets hot. This is the CPU. These are the RAM slots. These are the voltage regulators. You don't want this anywhere near it. So we have tie-offs. This is where all the zip ties are for. We're going to tie this off. 1, 2, 3, 4 zip ties. That's not going anywhere. Take some clippers, cut the excess off. And now we'll do the same with this, but keep in mind we have a ton more cables we have to manage, so you may want to hold off on the 24-pin cable until we do the rest of it. Fan power connectors. These are the 2 fan power connectors from the 200mm fans in the front. Coolermaster has kindly provided this splitter. Not only does it have room for 2, it has a spare 3rd in case you want to add something to the top of the case, and then you can simply plug this into the motherboard. However, this is only for if you're short connectors on the motherboard. We can simply disconnect this and save ourselves a lot of cabling and simply plug the 2 fans directly into the motherboard. Figuring out cabling is one of those things that just takes a little bit of time. One of the biggest mistakes most people can make is to be in a hurry with this stuff. Cut forward about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, and you'll notice a mess of cables here. I will clean this up and tie it up. These actually, because of the distance, I ended up using the fan splitter connector because I wanted to run it to the fan connector on the bottom of the board, so I went ahead and used those. This right here is the RGB connectors. This puts RGB. It controls the 12 volt and then the R, the G, and the B to the 2 front fans. And Coolermaster provides actually a 3-way splitter here, so you can connect another fan if you want to, maybe to the top of the case. And that also goes into a single RGB connector on the bottom of the board. And then these 2 cables right here, this is the USB 2 and HD audio. On the front of this case are 2 USB 2 ports and 2 USB 3 ports. We're going to do the USB 3 separate. That's actually this cable right here. But this provides the 2 USB 2 ports, and the other is the HD audio connector for the headphone and microphone jack. Cabling is something you're just going to have to spend some time with. Do not be afraid to plug things in and go, no, that doesn't work, and then unplug it and redo it. Just make sure to go back and zip tie it and clean it all up with these cable management ties once you're done. Turning the case around, this is the Rgb connector onto the motherboard. It's connected to all of it except the W part. There's actually a 5-port connector here. We're not using the W because Gigabyte has a 5-port connector and we're only using 4. This is the front panel fan connector. This is providing the fan power to the 2 front fans, USB 2 for the front connector, and then this is the HD audio. This is the USB 3 connector right here, and that's right here. But I'm going to run it up through the power supply shroud, so we're not going to connect it just yet. I didn't show it before, but this is the 90-degree power connector from Coolermaster. Very nice, keeps it from coming up. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but I think it's a pretty cool idea. And then this is the front panel connector for reset switch, power switch, hard drive activity, etc. And that's what we're going to use this for. I'm going to take this out, plug the connectors into this, and then plug this into the board. There's our reset switch. There's our hard drive activity light. And then here is our power LED. There's the positive, and there's the negative. And they are labeled, and it does matter. There's no PC speaker, so we don't have anything to plug in there. But we simply take this, and we plug it in the board. But not like this. I'll cable manage it, and then plug it into the front. I have now spent some time tying everything off in the back. Now, I make no claims to being a master cable management zip tie person. It's not a beauty build because there's going to be a sheet metal thing on the back. Nobody's ever going to see it. But none of these cables are going to move. None of these cables have any give. They won't touch the back of the motherboard. They're not going to bang against the side of the case. They're not going to slip down here. And so while I will acknowledge it's not the prettiest cable management job in the world, it's a secure cable management job. Now back to the other side. Here you can see the front panel connectors are plugged in. That's all zip tied and tied off in the back. Now we need to install our system RAM, our graphics card, and our 2 SSDs. Drives first. First things first, we're going to install our Gigabyte UD Pro solid state drive. This thing is very nice. I previously reviewed the 256 gigabyte size. Gigabyte was nice enough to send the 512 with this. It is a very good performing drive, and we'll install it as our C drive. We're going to install these here. These are toolless. They simply slide right out, but they're not toolless to install here because there are 4 screw holes. We'll use the screws that came with the case, and we'll screw the drive in. We now have our Gigabyte SSD screwed into the bottom. We'll drop that into place. I'm putting one more SSD in here for my own use. It's not part of the $1,000 build, but I'll show that to you in a future video featuring that SSD. For those of you curious, the other drive I'm installing in here is the SU650 from ADATA. It is a 480 gig drive, and you will see it in a future benchmark video. But I'm also putting it in here because 500 gigs isn't really enough for storage for my own needs, so this gives me a terabyte of SSD space. We will now take one of the modular SATA power cables. There's 2 connectors here. They'll plug into the back of the 2 drives, and this will plug into the power supply. The other thing that we're going to need is our PCI Express power connector, which I'm going to plug in at the same time to the power supply. This provides 2 6+2 connectors, so we could drive any single graphics card, well, almost any single graphics card off this power supply. The power supply comes with 2, so you can absolutely run 2 high-end cards in Crossfire or SLI. This right here is a very important thing to pay attention to. Here are the 6 SATA ports on the motherboard. Here's the first 4 provided by the chipset, and then the 2 extra that are separate. You will not be able to use all 6 of these if you have both M.2 slots filled. Turning the page, they provide a table which shows you what happens when you have items in each of the 2 M.2 slots. So for example, if we install a PCI Express NVMe solid state drive, then we can still use the first 4 slots, but we lose the 2 extra ports, the 2 that are up on the top. You see the X's right here. If we install a SATA SSD, then we only lose 1 of those ports. If you install a PCI Express drive in the bottom slot, it is a 2X, keep in mind, then you lose SATA port 2 and 3. If you put a NVMe SSD in both slots, you actually only get 2 SATA ports. You lose 4 SATA ports. You lose the 2 on the top and 2 from the chipset. So keep in mind that while it's great having these, Each motherboard is going to be a bit different in this configuration. We have the 2 SATA cables plugged into ports 0 and 1, so even if I install 2 NVMe drives here at some point in the future, these will still work, but we probably won't do that because frankly a terabyte of SSD space is fine. Here we have a total of 4 6+2 power connectors on 2 different cables. Now we're installing a single graphics card, so we don't need all this. However, I don't want to have to go dig around and try to find the cables if I ever want to crossfire or install something more powerful. What if you wanted to upgrade to a pair of Vega 64s in the future? You might need 4 power connectors. So I'm going to take one and zip tie it up and just tuck it away right here. There's no airflow issues here. There's nothing to be concerned about, so it's just going to sit right there. The other one's going to come up and run our graphics card. Here is our power supply shroud. I'm going to go ahead and run this through here because that's where it's going to go. And then I'm also going to run the USB 3 connector through it as well. We'll run that down and put that into place. We'll put our single screw back. Our power supply shroud is now back in place. We'll take our USB 3 connector and we'll just stick it onto the board. We will install our graphics card last. Now it's time to put the RAM in. To install our system RAM, you want to push each of these tabs out of the way. They're on both the top and the bottom. Different boards work differently, but this one has tabs all the way across. Now we're installing 16 gigs in 2 modules, but our Gigabyte RGB Aorus memory kit comes with 4. 2 dummy modules will fill up the extra space, giving us gorgeous RGB on this board. If you ever want more RAM, buy another kit, take out the dummy modules, drop them in, and you've got 32 gigs of RAM. How gorgeous are these modules? I don't know about you, but they are, in my opinion, beautiful looking. Those are nice metal shrouds. Let's get those installed. The dummy modules are missing the golden fingers. They've got a little bit for power here, but the rest of the golden fingers are missing. So install those in 2 alternating slots and then the real modules in the other 2. There's our first 2 modules installed. Those are the dummies. These are the real ones. You can see the golden fingers are fully populated. We'll take these out. Make sure to line up the notch with the notch on the board. They go straight down. They don't go at an angle. They don't tilt. They simply slide right into place. That is a perfect fit. Push on both ends. Snap, snap. That goes in really nice. We'll take our other one. It lines up, notch. That is a gorgeous logo. I don't know about you, but I like it. I really do. I've been quite a fan of the Gigabyte stuff lately. Some of the prettiest RGB in the business. 2 clicks. So 4 modules, 2 of them are real, 2 of them are just for that sweet, sweet RGB. And last but certainly not least, time for that graphics card. Inside the box, well, it's a graphics card. I've done tons of unboxings. You can see the Aorus logo. In here is the driver CD and other material. But this is really what we want, the RX 580 8GB card. Very nice. And this card does have some RGB on it. This Aorus logo does light up. It's got a copper plate on the back. Now this is printed here. This part is not RGB, just the logo on the top. And then there's a fan stop light. The fans on this do not turn when you're just in Windows. When there's not much load on the card, it is 100% silent. Only when you're intensely playing games do the fans turn at all. I have owned Aorus cards in the past. In fact, my first RX 580, way back when it launched last year, was an Aorus card. So if you watch my original reviews of it, you'll know I was very happy with it. Remember to take off the golden finger protection. You will also need to remove 2 of the back plates in order to install it. To install a graphics card, just push down here because this will pop up automatically when you install the card. That's also how you eject it. The card goes straight down. It doesn't tilt, doesn't go at an angle. It simply slides straight into the slot and clicks right into place. We'll take our screws and screw it in. And now we just have to do some cable management through here to plug in our 8-pin power connector, 8-pin PCI Express connector. The last few cables are tied off back here. Again, a bit of a mess, but we're going to have a cover over it so it doesn't matter. In fact, we'll put that on right now. Once we put the cover on, you can't see it anyway. Installing the cover now demonstrates my faith that everything's plugged in correctly. You might want to turn it on before doing that because, well, you never know. I've made mistakes before where I've had to take it apart. Our system build is now complete. A few other details I did along the way. The rear exhaust fan was plugged into the motherboard right here. The CPU you can see is plugged in up here. I zip tied off the extra 8-pin connector I don't need right here. We've got the USB 3 connector plugged in there. I did another zip tie here just to clean up the cables a bit. You can certainly spend more time making the cables pretty if you want to. The more time you spend, the prettier you can make it. But you can certainly get into it really deep, making them very pretty. There are also some aftermarket cables you can go with if you want to take it to the next level, if you want individually braided cables with spacers, but that's a bit much for a $1,000 build. Now it's time to put the glass back on, and then we're going to set up and install Windows, and then we're going to do some performance testing on this. We reinstall our glass, and we simply screw back on the last 2 connectors. And if you want, you can take off the fragile glass logo. I mean, that's just there to let you know that it is in fact real glass. There we go. Now we have ourselves an absolutely gorgeous system build. I will show you some RGB stuff here soon, but for now, let's get to the conclusion. And here we are with the system powered up. You can see those gorgeous RGB fans in the front. Now I have my bright studio lights on, so they're not too pretty yet, but I'll turn them down in a minute. I'll turn this on its side. I'll show you some of the RGB on the inside and the back. I was right. I wasn't 100% sure when I was putting it together, but that IO shield is RGB in the back. That's pretty cool. This is the first video that I filmed in my new filming studio that was an actual tech video. For those of you who have been following my moving vlogs, we are just in the final stages of getting moved in over there. There's still a few more things to be done, but this was filmed with the camera overhead on the table in the new studio. This part right here is actually being filmed in my house. I don't have this part with the camera facing ready yet, but it will be within a week or so. So you won't see too many videos with this background and this setup, at least in the near future. Hopefully they'll all be over there. Now there will be more videos coming on this particular system, Windows installation, BIOS updates, benchmarks, performance comparisons, and then as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will benchmark it with the stock cooler. I'll see how well it overclocks, which I don't expect it to be honest with you. The Wraith Stealth that comes with is fine at stock, but it doesn't do much more. And then we'll replace it with one of the nice Coolermaster coolers, and then we'll compare it to see whether it's worth spending money on an extra cooler, or if it's just a bunch of nice RGB. Now, I said before we started that I would mention what I would change if I were doing this again. Part of the reason I built the system this way was because the Ryzen 5 2600 is a very popular CPU. I haven't done a lot of coverage of it. A lot of people want to see it, and I certainly understand that. The reality is, if I didn't have a YouTube channel and I wasn't doing a Ryzen 5 2600 review build series, I wouldn't use it. I would use the Ryzen 7. The Ryzen 7 1700, when I'm filming this video, is $20 more expensive than a Ryzen 5 2600. Now that price is going to change over time. When you watch this, it might be different. But for $20 more, you get 8 cores and 16 threads rather than 6 cores and 12 threads. You also get the Wraith Spire RGB cooler. It's a 95 watt TDP cooler versus a 65 watt cooler in the Wraith Stealth, and you get RGB on the cooler. Now, it is true that out of the box, the Ryzen 7 1700 is not as fast. It runs at 3.2 gigahertz on all 8 cores out of the box versus 3.7 gigahertz on all the cores out of the box of the 2600. However, it is very, very easy to overclock these. You type it at 37 into the BIOS, you turn on XMP for the RAM, press F10, save, reboot, leave everything else on auto, boom, you're at 3.7 gigahertz. And then the gaming performance is effectively the same between a 1700 and a 2600 when you set the 1700 to 3.7. But the 8 cores is going to last you a lot longer. Now, it's true here in 2018 for gaming, there's no difference between the 6 cores and the 8 cores for gaming. If you're only going to keep your computer for a year or two, okay, fair enough, sure. 3 years, 5 years, you're going to wish you had the 8 cores. You may not need it today, but the whole industry is going to 8 core 16 threads for enthusiast performance. 4 cores, 8 threads, and possibly even 6 cores is going to be slanted towards the entry level 3 to 5 years from now. Not next year, not 2019, maybe not even 2020. But as we move beyond that point, it will be. And 8 cores will be the new standard, the way 4 cores, 8 threads has been for the past 10 years. I absolutely believe that if you're okay to play games between 60 to 100 frames per second, a Ryzen 7 1700 at 3.7 gigahertz is all you'll need for the next 5 years. You'll need a graphics card upgrade. That won't hold you for 5 years at 1080p high detail and everything. But it will for the next 2 years, and then 2 years from now you can replace it with something else and you'll be good to go for another 3 years after that. So this way your RAM, your motherboard, and your CPU don't have to change for 5 years. You can keep the core of your system the same. That may or may not be true with the Ryzen 5 2600. Now it's true, some people will say, well, I'll buy a 2600 and then I'll just get the Ryzen 7 when the third generation or fourth generation comes out. You could do that, to be sure, but they won't be $179 the way Ryzen 7 1700 is today. In any case, that's my personal preference. I don't care what you build. Links to both will be down in the description below. Buy whatever you want, but that's what I would personally do. Now the other change you already saw in the video, I added another SSD, the ADATA SU650. It's a budget SSD. It's a little bit less expensive than the SU800, but for a game drive, it's just fine. It gives me extra space for installing games and programs on this, because I'm actually going to keep this. I'm going to use it. It's going to be one of our main machines. It's going to replace probably the i5 6500 that my daughter currently uses, which is 4 cores, 4 threads, and this is 6 cores, 12 threads. Yes, after my long speech with Ryzen 7, I do have a YouTube channel, so frankly, the CPU will get upgraded several times anyway, so I'm not worried about it. But if I was just building it, I wasn't doing this stuff, it would have a Ryzen 7 in there. As far as the Rgb Ram, it's actually really, really pretty. And as I said, I'll turn this towards the camera in a minute and show it to you. It's about a $50 price premium to get the 2 dummy modules. You can get Rgb Ram for less than this, but it's just 2 sticks. If you want all 4 sticks populating all 4 slots, this is one of the very few options you have available unless you're ready to go to 32 gigs of RAM. As far as the graphics card, this is the deal. The 570 or the 580, depending upon what the current price is when you watch this, the 570 is a little bit better deal at the moment. These are the deal, much more so than the NVIDIA cards, and for 1080p gaming, it's all you need. Even 1440p for a lot of games, it's still all you need. The only other thing I'd consider doing differently for SSD space, I'd love to have an M.2 in here. Kudos to Gigabyte for sending me this very cool UD Pro drive. As I said, I've benchmarked these before. I tested the 256 gig version. Quick drive, good warranty, good endurance. I really like M.2 drives, so I would stick one in if I were speccing it out myself. And then maybe make that the game drive, make the M.2 boot drive, but it is what it is. The power supply, I would absolutely use what Gigabyte provided. I mentioned that in the first video. Great performance, great power delivery, 80 plus gold, semi-modular, for a crazy good price, so definitely keep that. And then this case, I love this case, for $99. If you want the RGB, if you want the cooling mount options on the top, the built-in handle, the choice of the front, the acrylic or the mesh, can you tell I really like this build? I genuinely do. Yes, it was sponsored by Gigabyte. Yes, they sent me these products, and I appreciate that. You would not go wrong building this. I now have the studio lights turned down a bit. I've got a few of them on, but I've turned down the main ones. I've turned this on its side, and I've taken off the glass because it is so reflective. That RAM really is gorgeous. It may not look as nice to you on your end, but when I look at it in real life, it is very pretty, and having all 4 of those populated is very nice. Now, I don't have anything synced up at the moment. Notice that the video card color doesn't really maybe sync with the rest of it, but that's adjustable. Being part of the same Fusion RGB system of Gigabyte, you can certainly change that if you want to. Notice that there's RGB on the chipset and RGB on the I/O shield, the plastic around that's got some there. And then, of course, you've got the 2 fans in the front. If you want to add more, either on the cooler, and we'll do some more shots when we change out the cooler, or put some RGB fans on the top, you can tie those in with the extra RGB connections, and there's actually another RGB plug on the top of the board, so you can set up a whole other chain of RGB if you want. If you want Christmas on your desk, here you go. And as promised, I turned it all the way around. You can see the RGB on the I/O shield back there. It's not much, and frankly, you're probably never going to see it, but it is kind of cool that it's there. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below, and please hit that bell notification icon next to the subscribe button if you'd like to be notified when more of these videos come out. Questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions, and random musings, put those in the comment section below, and then please check the links in the video description. Link to the first video in this series, links to all of these products on Amazon and Newegg down there. As I said before, those are affiliate links. They support the channel. If you want to see more of these, please consider using those when shopping. It's greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for watching. I will see all of you next time.